Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is March 5, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Ronan McDonald. Where in the heck you calling in from, Ronan?
Melbourne, Australia,
How
where
cool,
it's morning time. Yeah,
how
and it's
cool is
also
that?
very hot.
Hot and morning. How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Ooh. Um, I would say to flourish. To flourish. I mean, that's in some ways maybe even the best thing for all living things. Or if you like, for us Joyceans, Jerry, to bloom.
To
Now, people
bloom.
bloom. You can, of course, you can flourish in different ways, and nobody flourishes completely. But by flourish, I suppose I mean to realize potentials. We have many potentials that we will never realize, but to realize a fair few of one's potentials.
Yeah.
Flourish in different ways. That can be in a career, it could be a family, but I think flourishing is the best thing, maybe even for every living thing.
I love that word. Thank you so much. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
If you'd asked me that at any other time in my life, I think I probably would have said books. But and maybe this is a sign of a shifting culture, I've become really allured by the spoken word in the last few years, by podcasting, by audiobooks. I find myself um, going for long walks and listening to podcasts and audiobooks. I'm kind of, it's hard to keep up with contemporary fiction, but a lot of my consumption of contemporary fiction is now via audiobooks.
Amazing. So let's just stay on reading for a second. Did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to, two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
I would say all three.
Yeah.
I think my parents, I wouldn't call them. I mean, they were, my father in particular, was a reader and valued books, but neither of my parents went to university. There were books in the house, but they were limited. But there was a valuing for books, I think. So I was encouraged to read as a child, but I guess I took to it. Whether I would have had there been podcasts around in those days, who knows? But certainly, yeah. I mean, I was probably, like many of your guests, quite a voracious reader as a child. That was done with the encouragement of my parents, but it wasn't a very academic or intellectual family. I would say an opinionated family, which is in
Yeah.
some way kin to it.
And why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think the reason for that varies. It varies depending on the sort of civilization. I guess and it also depends upon a hierarchy of needs. I guess if we are living in conditions of scarcity, the information we're collecting and gathering is information which is going to help us solve the scarcity, isn't it? So the accumulate. I mean, we have probably a relationship with information in our culture and our age, which is unprecedented historically, and it's very new, and we're trying to understand what it means to have these tsunamis and oceans of information at our fingertips. But the curiosity that looks for information probably comes after basic needs have been met. I mean, I'm imagining this is really a question for anthropologists might be able to answer this more accurately, but my sense is that if you're struggling for survival, your informational search is going to be more determined and more ends directed than the sort of curiosity or open curiosity that one might have in a more leisured context.
Really good, Rona. And do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate, but I think it's mediated and produced in the way I've described by cultures.
Yeah.
I think there is a search for truth deep in us. I think we are. I mean, there's a lovely phrase. I love quoting this phrase by Seamus Heaney when he says, "We are hunters and gatherers of values."
Yeah.
And I think that there's a sense in which our search for our curiosity, our openness, our need to find information, to place ourselves in the world, and to search for meanings is hardwired. I would venture, but it's profoundly mediated by the culture we're in. An example I gave was the difference between the sort of information one would be seeking in conditions of scarcity
Yeah.
compared to superfluity.
Very good. Do thoughts create emotions?
I think it's circular. I think they both create each other.
Yeah.
David Hume said, "Reason is and must be the slave of the passions." I have some sympathy for that. I don't think that we are thinkers. I think our thoughts are directed by our emotions, but I think it's circular. I think there's a circular causal relationship. Would be my intuition about that.
Yeah. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
Reflect upon it a great deal.
Yeah. That's McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. And
Yeah.
can humans think without language?
I think it's very hard to answer that, but my sense would be no. I think language is the rails upon which thought goes, which thought runs.
Yeah.
So I think thought, as we understand it, is intimately connected to the words, and I don't just mean language as in words, but I mean systems of signification that we
Yeah.
might use. I don't see how you can think without those systems.
Very good.
Understand.
Yeah, Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Yeah.
What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
What do I personally do, or what does one do?
Yeah.
What do I do when language breaks down? I think quite often it depends on the context. If you're in a situation, interpersonal situation, and language breaks down, in other words, there's a breakdown of communication. You have to pull back and try and shift and move around.
Yeah.
If language breaks down in terms of there's a fundamental conceptual block or lack of clarity in something, it seems to me to be a very important skill that we spend our life learning to cultivate, to be comfortable with opacity, to be comfortable with confusion and perplexity. So if by language breaking down, if we're thinking of that as communication, then I think you need to restart and move around. If there's something that needs to be communicated, I mean, when language breaks down in interpersonal relationships, or indeed between groups, the result is often violence. So one needs to find other ways of sidestepping that. But if it's a sort of conceptual blockage, I think we need comfort to be sit easy with the half light, with perplexity.
Well put, Ronan. You're really concise, and I appreciate how articulate and clear you're talking to me. I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and it feels like I'm getting it. But you brought up that word violence, and I'm curious. Both McLuhan and Krishnamurti said violence is the human search for identity.
Well, it's very suggestive. It's hard, given your question earlier about whether search for information is innate. Is violence innate? Is violence a search for identity? It's obviously pretty ubiquitous. We haven't succeeded in removing it altogether. It's a sort of an elemental self-assertion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Violence quite often. It's sort of an elemental assertion of I am here, which is why it's so often, I think, a response to humiliation. It's the first, in some ways, it's the default response to humiliation is to respond with violence because it's an ultimate act of self-assertion and group assertion.
Well, you have like ESP because first of all, you answered the question with a question. So you win because that's what this series is all about, is inventing new questions. And
Good. Okay.
being an Irish studies professor, that's what Irish people do. They answer a question with a question. And they go,
we're very slippery people. So that's that's appropriate. I didn't know I could ask questions.
But it's also, you anticipated, because I'm doing this big research project on can art stop war? And, this one guy says, well, no, art can't stop war. People can stop war. But the bottom line is most people think that we're hardwired for violence. And, Maria Gambudis, an anthropologist, kind of tried to prove that there were societies where there were no violence, Gaia, matriarchal society, matriistic societies. But since you answered the question with the question, I'd like to just hear your hunch, and I'd like what you're doing. You're saying, I'm after people's hunch, their guess, their intuition, because sometimes I ask these questions that are like neuroscientific, and people go, well, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm like, well, that's all right. Doesn't mean that you can't give me your hunch. So do you think humans are hardwired to be violent, or is it innate? I mean, is it, sorry, that's dumb. Is it innate or hardwired, or is it a learned?
Well, I think that, look, if you press me on that, I mean, innate or learned, both. But yes, it would seem to me that it has an innate component, which does not mean it's inevitable. Things which are innate are not our destiny. Lots of things are innate. Like, we may be hardwired for violence, but I've lived my life so far without huge amounts of it, apart from fights in the schoolyard. I've never fired a gun. I've never taken a life. So it's not, yet. I hope I never do, but it's not destiny. And individuals can avoid it, cultures can avoid it, and societies can avoid it. So I would want to push back upon the idea that something which is deep or elemental is necessarily something we default to. I tend to a kind of a Hobbesian view of human nature, and a pessimistic one. That doesn't mean I think that, there's no point in striving for art or for achievement. On the contrary, it's precisely art, civilization, and so on, which can counter the less palatable innate things in our in human nature.
Beautiful. Your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Well, more. I think our emotions are much stronger than our thoughts, which goes back to that question earlier, in which I said the relationship was circular.
Yeah.
But I think our emotions are stronger motivations than our thoughts. Now, our thoughts key in and are related to and tied into our emotions, just the same as I think our brain is. It's a related opposition, the brain and the body. The two are not separable. Ultimately, they connect to each other. And similarly, our emotions are our thoughts. But I do think that it is the feelings which really motivate us.
Yeah. 2 questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. 1, is thinking a function of the soul?
Oh, well, I mean, that opens a huge question of definition. I don't know what Turing, I don't know that quote from Turing. I don't know what he meant by the soul. What do I think? Thinking is a version of is something from the soul. I mean, the concept of the soul opens so many theological issues of some sort of one understanding of it is some sort of ghost-like presence that is outside thought and selfhood, and I'm not really sure how to consider that. You know, it doesn't resonate with me. The line that thinking comes from the soul. I think thinking is a thinking, depending on the sort of thinking. I mean, thinking can be thought can, whilst at its best, is an elevating, capacious, ennobling thing. I don't see it as intrinsically so. I think thought can be diabolical. It can be cold, instrumentalist, coldly rational in a disenchanting sort of a way, which would make it the kind of the anti-soul, the idea of a thought which disenchants and desacralizes everything, which turns that kind of rational, laser-like, forensic, pure mechanistic side of us onto something. I don't think that's of the soul, but that is nonetheless falls into one of our definitions of thought. But the thought which is based upon reason with a capital R, as understood by, and the search for truth, as understood by the Greeks, all the way through the history of thought in the Western tradition, who valorized that so much. That is an ennobling, elevating quality in human beings, which does, I think, which does connect, perhaps, if there is such a thing as the divine within us, which would be one definition of the soul, that does connect to it.
Yeah, really good. And that's a second Turing question is, can machines think?
I think that that question is very current, and my understanding, I'm not a tech guy, but from what I read from a distance, Turing's old definition of the idea that, I think it was Turing's definition of AI or something, an intelligent computer was when you could have a conversation through a door and not know that it was a computer. I think that was his definition. Wow. When that's happened, we'll have artificial intelligence. I think we're at that point now, but I think, but nonetheless, I think the current tech, the current state of AI, which is coming for us all, for good or for bad, and I think for both, and I would not underestimate the bad, and lots of people are saying that, we certainly can mistake AI for thoughtful beings, for thinking entities. That's happening all the time right now, that individuals are mistaking artificial intelligence as agential beings like themselves. I don't believe, and it's again an intuition, I'm not a computer scientist, but I don't believe that machines can think in any comparable way to a human being.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning is always a very slippery word, isn't it? Because it means, on the one hand, the interpretation of facts, but it also has that kind of Viktor Frankl sense of man's search for meaning. So it's both a value-free and a value-laden word.
Yeah.
So I'd want to make the distinction between those two meanings of meaning. So happiness or meaning, do I search for happiness or meaning? I don't set out for one or the other.
No.
I don't think I consciously set out for one or the other. And I think if one did, it would almost cancel the decision.
Yeah.
Because if you set out and said, right, I don't care about truth, I'm just going to look for happiness, there's a kind of an acknowledgement of an unpalatable truth that you're trying to avoid, which covertly signals there. And if you're sort of looking for truth, not happiness, I'm going to be a robust searcher for reality, however unconsoled and unbearable, then you're kind of also importing a certain um, valor or eudaimonism into the very search. So I think the opposition is hard to maintain.
Yeah, it's Victor actually said that's what I base the question on, that meaning tends to last and happiness doesn't necessarily last. But you covered it well. You're a comprehensivist, and I appreciate it. It's sort of like Pascal. He says, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that, and everything in between. It's like, good luck. But does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness...
Well, this is... We're on to the neurological questions you mentioned.
Yeah.
You mentioned
But
before.
this is like, is consciousness bubbling away, and we're more so detecting it, or more so creating it?
I don't think consciousness is one thing. I think consciousness is a word that we use to group together lots of mental phenomena.
Yeah.
And often when we talk about consciousness, we mean self-consciousness. So we mean kind of a meta-consciousness,
Yeah.
a consciousness of consciousness.
Yeah.
My understanding is there are certain strands of neurology. I mean, if you think of consciousness as kind of going across all living things, which includes the flower which closes when you touch it, to sort of a somatic consciousness, then it becomes much deeper. But if we're thinking of a particular human Cartesian sense of self-identity, well, that needs to be classified with a more precise terminology than consciousness. I think often that word covers so many different things, brings them together, and I think we need more specificity in what we are referring to. So I mean, if we're talking about, for example, I think sometimes people talk about consciousness, they mean the I am, that feeling of I am, don't they?
Yeah.
Where does that come from? Well, I mean, it's possibly an illusion. The I am.
Hello.
That's not a novel idea. I mean, that's something which I think has been accepted in Buddhist tradition for a very long time. The idea that there is a coherent, continuous subject across time is an illusion. That's not new, and I think from my understanding, a lot of neuroscientists are giving the idea of it being an illusion a lot of credence.
Well, you covered a lot there. One is Deepak Chopra just said in his Playboy interview a couple of years ago, a person's identity is a socially induced hallucination. There's no such thing as a person. There's only a bunch of consciousness that's constantly in flux. I really want to ask you this, because words good, how to break down words. And this is a question that McLuhan asked. How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So, you can, now it's art and technology. So it's drop the un and say consciousness difference from conscious. So art is the collective unconsciousness. When you said consciousness is I am, is that what art is? Saying, oh, I'm identifying and using, well, what is that? The creation of art. Technology, is it different than art? Well, you invent a pencil and then you make art with the pencil. So let's say, what do you think he's meaning as technologies as the collective unconscious?
Well, I'm familiar vaguely with the Jungian idea of the art as kind of, kind of part of a mythic structure or an archetype.
Yeah.
Technology as the collective unconscious, I don't understand why that would be. I mean, does the distinction? I mean, the distinction between technology and art is an easily perforated one.
Yeah,
Seems to me, techne, the Greek call it. I mean, this idea of a separate realm of human creativity, which in some ways gets elevated by its lack of utility,
yeah,
um, is a peculiarly Western idea of human creativity. I think other cultures and the ancients saw the
yeah.
two as much more connected, and things can be useful and beautiful at the same time. Um,
Well, that's Ronan. That is exactly what Marshall was constantly just asking questions. He was in academia, and you're supposed to say concepts. He was basically teasing people that his percepts were concepts. So he was just perceived, because he actually said that his favorite was the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
yeah, yeah,
So, if you're a garbage collector, or you could go, oh, that's my art form, this
yeah.
garbage. But no, you're a garbage collector. No, you're an artist, and you have a regular job. So anyways, we'll touch on a lot of this will come back around.
Okay.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
What an interesting question. Oh, speed of light. Speed of light not to kind of complicate the question.
Yeah.
I mean, my thoughts. I mean, when you asked that question you asked me a little while ago about when I had to fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I think about I think about something, and I know I'm right when. I'm not sure I ever know I'm right.
Right. No, there's no right in that. That was good.
There
It's
wasn't. I can't
I
remember
don't
exactly.
I don't
Yeah,
know what I think
that's it.
until
Yeah.
yeah, and
That
you
I
said
don't know what I
that.
think, but my answer, like, okay, I don't remember how I answered it, but I don't think I ever know I'm right. Or
Right.
sorry, I don't know. I don't think I ever know what I think. Sorry,
Thanks.
I
Right,
don't.
right.
I don't. Not sure I ever
Yeah.
know what I'm thinking. My thoughts. So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is maybe it's just me, but when you compare quickness of thought, my thoughts um, are step gingerly, and they're often very uncertain,
Good.
and they often change, and I often change my mind and my views.
That
Um,
that's my mom. I says, "Could I ask you these questions?" She goes, "Yeah, but tomorrow I might answer them differently." Well, it's you're admitting, that, back to the Deepak Chopra, that we're constantly in flux. And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
if I said that, then that's why I call myself a hypocrite, because
I
I'll
like
say one thing and then I'll say the other. It's McLuhan said, "You mean my whole fallacy is wrong?"
that.
So here's a poet. Audre Lorde said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Her colleague Yvonne Rainer said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
Um, well, first of all, do we need to dismantle the whole of the master's house? Why not just live in it?
Yeah,
Why not have better quarters within it? Why
yeah,
not take a claim to it?
yeah,
If you dismantle the whole house or destroy the whole house, there might be no shelter. I'm also mindful of, and I'm going to mangle this quotation, but Caliban in Shakespeare's The Tempest says to Prospero, "You gave me your language, and my profit on it is I can curse the red plague on you for teaching me, for learning me your language," he
yeah,
says. So the only way Prospero Caliban can kind of counter his master, his tyrant, his Prospero, is using the language that Prospero has given him.
yeah,
Uh, if we destroyed the language, if we move from the metaphor of house to the metaphor of language,
yeah,
he would have nothing to
yeah.
strike back at. Um,
Well, that's
so
why Yvonne Rainer says expose the tool. And again, even though I'll open these questions with a cute quote, it doesn't mean you have to apply it. The basic question is what tool do you gravitate towards? You can add the word new if you want, and you can add the context of dismantling the master's house if you want, you know.
Yeah. I think that we have we have language. Language
Yeah,
is contaminated. Language
yeah,
is weighed down and polluted by history. There's no question.
yeah,
But we have nothing else to use other than to It's also full of beauty and the power of
yeah,
expression and elevation, but there is nothing else to hand to express our thought. And we had a discussion about thought a minute ago. And I answered that question about thought language. There's nothing else. There is nothing else. I mean, language can alienate us. It's used to oppress and divide, but it's also used to connect.
yeah.
And it's the only thing we have to connect. So
That's
we search for the new
yeah.
within the old, I think.
You're anticipating so many questions. It's brilliant because T.S. Eliot said, "When I talk to you, I got to use words." And it's like, no, you can use gesture and dance and other sounds and grunts, but the next question is a follow-up that someone suggested because I said, "What new tool do you suggest?" Now they said, "What new toy do you suggest?"
Mm. What new? I mean, toy makes me think of play.
Yeah,
Play, often seen as peripheral, often seen as a frippery, often
yeah,
seen as something we have at the start of our life and we discard. We grow. When I was young, I had childish things. No, play is absolutely central to human dignity, to human community. And in some ways, I'm more comfortable with the word play than the word art. Because I think art carries a lot of kind of inflated, quasi-numinous sort of separation to be a real artist. But play is something we all understand. And play is a spontaneous expression of joyousness that we're good at as children. And in some ways, we lose the capacity for it, but we should cultivate that capacity. It's central. And
yeah,
you talk about art being a something which can kind of be an antidote to violence. So I think can play. So I
yeah,
can think in that spontaneous, interactive human creation, which is use, entertainment, pleasure. So yeah, look, what toy do I think? Going back to the Lourdes quote about dismantling the master's house, um, I think that there is a kind of idea on the idea of toy, the idea of play connects us to the idea of the carnival, the idea of the community coming together in a carnival, which also breaks down, opens up fixities of identity.
yeah,
We talked a bit about identity, and we talked a little bit about things which are innate, and that as being some kind. I mean, that as being something which can be a trap. The idea of inheritance being destiny or innateness being destiny. Well, I think one way in which human culture mediates against that is the fact that we can play at being other things, or that we can we don't just discover who we are, we create who we are. We create who we are through toys. I mean,
yeah,
that's what Stephen Dedalus says, isn't it? At the end of Portrait, I will forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race. It's uncreated. It's forging. It's future orientated rather than inherited. So I think by thinking about who we are in terms of futurity in the future and creation, rather than the past and discovery, we can liberate ourselves from that burden of inheritance and destiny.
beautiful. That's you brought up Walter Pater in one of your YouTube talks. It's on YouTube. And he said the great line, all art aspires to the condition of music. And it's like painting and poetry and architecture wish it could be as cool as music. And what do you do with music? You play it.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah.
play architecture. You don't play a painting. I mean, there's elements of crossover, but it's just what we design with saying words. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
God, everything, everything. um, is there anything in particular where when I going to bed at night? Yeah, look, it runs the gamut of the current concerns, the past concerns, the future concerns, all those things that that will profit nothing to worry about. I should probably spend more time with your friend Deepak Chopra to try and overcome that.
No, it's funny because my mom was accused by many of being too much of a worry wart, So at her funeral service, I got up and I said, "There's a lot of people in this room who worry that Dolores worried too much." So I think it's concern. What's the difference between concern and worry? It's a fine line, or you think, usually the cliche is, Ronan, oh, worry is harmful and concern is good. But, how do you really differentiate?
Yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I guess my mother who's still with us, is also has always been a huge worrier, and that was kind of just. I think it was like, okay, how do we differ between concern and worrying? I think when worrying intensifies and kind of connects to other kind of cognitive patterns of taking disproportionately negative views. I mean, I say disproportionately as if worry is an illusion, and it can. One can worry. A lot of what we worry, I don't know. I think this happens as you get a little bit older. You realize, no, I spent my life worrying about the wrong things. Yeah. You spend your life worrying about things which don't happen, and then something bad does happen. And so that's what I should have been worrying about.
No, it's just the other thing. You get in an airplane. You go, please don't get in a crash. Or my friend says, no, just say, please encapsulate this plane with white light so it's a safe trip. So think of the positive rather than the negative, but the negative might cancel out that happening. So we don't know which it is. It's like Auden said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us.
Yeah. That's so
See, we want to think all these things activate us because we've invested in them. But that's the whole thing is worry causing something not, there's many things, like back to violence. If you watch a violent film, does it cause you to go be violent, or does it alleviate you of the need to be violent?
Yeah. Well, this comes back to about talking about violence. This goes back to tragedy and how we understand tragedy.
Yeah.
Aristotle in the Poetics talks about the function of we watch tragedy. In other words, we watch things which are unpleasant or which are violent on stage in order to purge pity and fear. So that idea of we go through we witness a performance, not in other words to excite the feelings, but to purge them or release them, is very deep within that one conception of we're very deep within within the history of aesthetics, history of art, of how we understand art. So it's a I mean, I'm not like that is there, and it's profound, and it's hugely influential theory, and it has its validity, and people have returned to it. I suppose maybe most obviously people talk about it in psychoanalytic terms, it's just kind of that idea of a release. What do I feel about it? I feel that I'm not quite sure I like the idea of art as a purgative. It's a bit medicinal for me.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think the releasing of unsavory emotions. I don't know quite. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, but it does have a long tradition. But going back to the question of worry and concern, it's a really interesting distinction that you made there between that idea we have a concern has a good press
Yeah.
and worry has a bad press.
Yeah.
And concern is about passion, whereas I guess there's a sense also of passivity and activity in worry. We have the other meaning of worry, don't we? The idea of a dog worrying sheep. You worry a spot or something. You fidget with it. You have that sense of worrying it being something we do, rather than a disposition of care, which is what's in concern. And I think
concern implies care. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mean a dog worrying a sheep is just sort of directing it? Is that?
Well, no, I don't know if you bothering. But if your dog, if the farmer comes up and shoots your dog, he might say it's because it was worrying my sheep.
Oh,
maybe that's the use of English and Irish. But people saying, "Well, stop worrying that pimple." You might say to somebody if they're or stop worrying that. You're bothering it.
Yeah.
It's just another semantic. It's another root of the word worry, and I think that meaning translates into sort of something which is worry has the sense of dwelling unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And worrying kind of can become an obsession. So there's a sense of fixity. In that way, I think it might have a link to melancholy.
Yeah.
Because you know how Freud thinks about melancholy as something we get stuck in, as opposed to mourning, which helps us pass. I think worrying does have a link to depression. Good and a pessimistic outlook and predicting the worst does have a link. So I think that worrying can often be kind of somewhere where you're stuck, and going back to consciousness, you're reflecting all the time on all the things that can go wrong, and it's terribly agitating.
Totally marvelous, Ronan. I'm learning so much because I like this comparison. You taught me. Tragedy is Aristotle saying we watch the unpleasant to purge pity and fear. That is so insightful. Blake says we become what we behold. So, there you go. That's like Lenny Bruce said, you can call cops three things: a peace officer, a cop, or a pig. So why don't we just call them peace officers? Because that's what we want them to do.
Yeah.
We want peace.
Yeah.
But we don't call, we're like, oh my God, a cop. Oh my God, he's a pig, But we become what we behold. It seems so logical, but it's also maybe the opposite.
Well, that's interesting. They do those. They've kind of had those. They've done some research on mistakes where two kids in school with the same name have had their results confused. And the guy who wasn't doing very well, who gets the A, inevitably starts to improve. So he starts to live up to the A. Do you see the point I'm making? There's been a few cases like this where the error in which a kid who gets an A but really deserved an F starts to see himself as an A student and identifies himself as an A student, and the results go up and he becomes an A student.
Yeah.
So this may be another example of the the way people kind of live up to the name, live up to the identity.
Yeah, it's also mind-body connection, going back to Deepak Chopra, because you can't separate the mind in the body, but we think we can, feeling and thought. And Willie Mays hit 4 home runs in one game, and he was sick on pea soup. And I always like, there, see, he was sick, and that's why he did it, because he pushed harder. And
Yeah.
Lily Tomlin said the same thing. She says, I did the greatest show of my life when I was sick, and I just went out there and pulled through. But Ronan, this is McLuhan learning from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions.
Yeah.
So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
That's a great question and concept, and because I kind of agree with it. I agree that art. I like that conception of art.
Yeah.
I like that it's. I like the idea of art as an antenna, and I like the idea that it is articulating a culture, and particularly articulating a technology and the technological changes. I think that's right. But as I say that, I realize that it's intention with a point I earlier made about the distinction between technology and art. Because if art is this antennae and responding to technology, there is that distinction. Though I think that a lot of art is using technology and will be using technology, as McEwen above all would be aware of. Why do we not pay attention to art? I think. I mean, have we ever paid attention to art or to sirens?
Have we ever? That's really good. Yeah, if you're raised in Ireland, do you read Joyce? It's like, no, we sell coffee mugs with this picture.
Sure, that's right. I mean, you mentioned Joyce, because I think, someone like Joyce and you mentioned Ezra Pound and people like that, and T.S. Eliot. You mentioned people like that are responding to shifts in technology, certainly to shifts in the culture, and they're creating very new forms of art, which to a lot of people are obscure, difficult. Yeah. So there is a kind of perhaps you could say that some parts of the artistic cadre which are expressing this whirlwind, accelerating, groundless, techno-dystopia, techno-utopia, whatever you want to see it. A lot of it is perhaps cannot be registered in a way which unifies the culture.
Yeah.
In a way, perhaps you might say that in previous eras, the realist novel had broad accessibility. So the art which is most registering the whirlwind, the massive overstimulation, the dystopia, the alienation, perhaps doesn't always have the popular penetration that it might need to have for people to take notice. There's also the fact that, more obviously, I think a lot of our culture, a lot of the technology is profoundly seductive, intoxicating, addictive. Most people are being tremendously commodified through the satiation, to the excitation and then the satiation of pleasures of various sorts, whether that's the pleasure of scrolling through a social media feed or whatever. All that technology is giving us little drip feeds of endorphin. So given that all those drip feeds of endorphins, which is keeping us hooked and also selling our attention to advertisers, why would you want to kind of detach oneself from the feeding teat in order to engage with a difficult artistic critique of it?
You just quoted McLuhan indirectly. It's an amazing quote. I'm not going to bring it up yet because I have to not forget these two things.
Yeah.
Ronan, what you do often with these questions is you psychoanalyze the question. That's what I want to do. I want these more to be me and you versus the wording on the question. So we're doing the structure, but most people, I ask the question and then they think they have to answer the question. But you seem to be like John Cage said, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer. Not that you're not, you are answering, but that in the other one you brought up that really resonated is the McLuhan-esque way to translate the Wizard of Oz to the Wizard of Us. And it's amazing because what does Dorothy have to go get is the writing utensil for skywriting, which is advertising, create the disease and offer the cure. And what does she finally do? She goes to the wizard and her dog pulls the curtain back and reveals the workings of the wizard, the workings of the advertisers. And who is the dog? The artist.
Yeah.
The artist are Toto. We're the atomic.
Oh, lovely.
We're the atomic dogs pulling the curtain back and go, see, we don't tell you how to think. We just go, see, the emperor's wearing no clothes.
I love that. I also note, I haven't read that by McLuhan. I must check that out. I love that reading of The Wizard of Oz. And of course, The Wizard of Oz starts off with an attempt to kill the dog. That's what
oh my God, I've never thought of that. To kill the dog,
that's what the impetus for the whole narrative is. When that woman the actor becomes the Wicked Witch of the whichever East or West, the green-faced woman, tries to kill the dog, wants to have her killed.
That is amazing. See, I'm always learning new things because that was brilliant. I need that bad. I'm going to give this a lecture on can art stop war, and I can really flesh it out to kill. So so the follow-up question to that is, do artists have moral obligation?
I think an artist's major moral obligation is to the art.
Yeah.
Is to make the thing that they are making as good as they can make it, and to help it to realize itself fully. I think that's the chief moral obligation. I think other moral considerations, including political considerations, can distort that and can lead to unsatisfying, didactic, opinionated sorts of products.
Yeah.
It's quite. I'm thinking like in the preface, Oscar Wilde. You mentioned Pater. Oscar Wilde's preface to the Picture of Dorian Gray. Which he writes after that novel gets all the criticism, and he has this one-page preface to the Picture of Dorian Gray, and he starts off, "There's no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written. That is all." And he kind of refuses that. And I think we should. I don't like the idea of extrinsic moral obligations in artists.
Yeah, no, it's amazing because it's also asking these questions. I really want the person to answer it the way I kind of think, but I'm open and I don't go, I'll joke and I'll say, sometimes I'll go, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. But people want to say, well, everybody has a moral obligation. But I mean, isn't that what art is? Mike Kelly said, I'm curious your thought on this. Art is making your problems other people's problems.
Yeah. I think it's perhaps, I mean, is problem the right word? It might be making your perplexity other people's perplexities
That's
rather
better
than
word. Plex.
problems.
Yeah.
Because you've seen something which, or your recognition, because I think the
Yeah.
recognition and the truth go with the perplexity. You encounter something in the world that troubles you, perhaps, or is
Yeah.
irresolvable,
Yeah.
and the only way for the artist to kind of responds to that by representing it, and then
Yeah.
other people go, yes, that's something I've felt as well.
Yeah.
But it's not making your problem other people's problem. It is raising awareness
Yeah.
of the stone in our shoe that we all have, but that we couldn't quite name before.
Yeah. Well, here's the follow up. Fanny Howe, a poet. The point, and by the way, thank you for saying that about that Mike Kelly quote. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. That really helped me. Fanny Howe says the point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't. Now that one I cannot understand, but I always want to kind of get what she's. What do you think she's saying there, or do you agree or disagree, or?
um, I think I disagree. I think I
Yeah,
disagree. I think, why do I say that? Because I don't think art is about, I mean, the sort of art I like and the sort of um, stuff I value and disposition I value isn't diagnosing something called life with a capital L.
yeah,
It's not, I have an interest in Beckett, and I don't want to wander into that as well. Or I have had, like, earlier in my career.
yeah,
And I think Beckett started off his career very much influenced by philosophical pessimism. He read deeply in Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer would indeed have taken a kind of a view of life as a bleak view of life, and other pessimistic philosophers that
yeah,
influenced Beckett. But I think as Beckett got older, he got much more bewildered in a productive way. And I think even though some people would still maybe have this image of Beckett as someone who matches that quote or lives up to that quote, that you gave by Fanny Howe, that life's not worth living, but it shows you that it isn't. I think
yeah,
he wouldn't like the logic of it, but I think what he would say, and not put words in the man's mouth, he can give many interviews, is that it's not. Well, he did say this actually. He was asked if he was an absurdist, and he said no, it's not. To say that is to judge, and we're not in a position to judge. Art
yeah,
is not about judging. It's certainly not about judging something called life, as if we could ever get out of life to put ourselves into a position where we could say this is something elementally bad or this is something elementally good. This goes back to the conversation we were having about the self and the illusion. If we're putting under pressure the idea that the I is a coherent, continuous
yeah,
self, and that's just a subjective experience, then we most certainly have to put under pressure the idea that this I has access to something totalizing called life,
yeah.
that it can stand outside and make judgments on good or bad.
That's Groucho Marx says, "Who are you going to believe, your eyes or my lying eyes, or you are you going to believe my eyes or your lying eyes?" But there's a couple things you brought up, and I was wondering, Sam Beckett, we're not in the position to judge. Is that similar to McLuhan saying understanding is not having a point of view?
Yes,
That's similar.
yeah.
Yeah. And
It sounds similar to me.
yeah,
Sounds similar to me.
yeah,
And I would also say something I said a little earlier about kind of sitting with confusion.
yeah.
The
Sitting with,
playwright
yeah,
sitting
yeah,
with confusion. The playwright Brian Friel said confusion is not an ignoble condition. And we tend to, maybe we're wired to try to get rid of it, to have clarity all the time.
yeah,
Life doesn't. I'm here. I just said you can't talk about life, but human experience doesn't give us,
yeah,
doesn't deliver in this in the expanse of our phenomenal experience on this earth. We have lots of things which we don't know and we'll never know. I mean, including the future. You know, we don't know the future, and we have to be comfortable with that, or we have to, you know, live with that.
Yeah. There's so much to go with you, Ronan. It's like a million tangents. But back to Beckett, I just have to insert, because what I'd like to do with you someday is a salon with a couple people just on Beckett, because I've explored Beckett a lot, but not that. I'm more like movies of his work, or I'm not a great reader. But did you ever see the film Not Film? It's the documentary on the Beckett film called Film.
Oh, with Barney Rossett.
If you haven't seen this documentary is amazing. It's called Not Film by Ross Lipman, and you can get it. And it's a must see, because they even taped Beckett. Barney taped Beckett talking without he knowing he was being taped. But it's hey, have you seen Beckett's film?
I have seen Beckett's film with Rossett. I haven't. I've just written it down. Not filmed by. I'll check it out. Sounds. I mean, because there aren't that many extant recordings of. There are a few which have come to light and now circulating, of Beckett actually speaking on film. So that's really interesting.
But it's also like Buster Keaton going, "What do you want to film the back of my head? I'm a movie star. The whole film's the back of my head." And then Buster's at the end of his career, alcoholic, and he goes to the Cannes Film Festival. It was like it made him revive that he was worthy, and it was like, I'll take anything, Beckett. Yeah, okay. What a collection. But the other one is, Zizek.
Slavoj.
Yeah, I've had it out with him a couple times, just talking casually after a talk. He thinks Beckett's better than Joyce. And I'm like, that's what you're supposed to think. It's counterculturally correct to say Beckett's better than Joyce. But anyways, it's just
I'm not sure Beckett would agree. I'm not sure Beckett would agree.
Have a hot oil mud wrestling, between Beckett and Joyce. What would happen? I mean, it's unbelievable what Beckett did, and it's so immense, but it is sort of, it always reminds me, how immense is it? It's like a twig of a tree for a play, Waiting for Godot. You just see the one little prop is a twig tree, that's Beckett to me. That
definitely. Yeah. And the relationship with Joyce is so interesting, because they're going in. Beckett's career is formed by Joyce, but going in the opposite direction.
That's so much.
Yeah.
So are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Are there new ideas?
Yeah. There you go. That's good.
I think, that's slightly flippant answer, but I think new ideas are very rare, actually. There are variations in old ones, but I think philosophical novelty is hard to come by. Though it often there's an amnesia in talking to people who come up with ideas and don't realize that they're very precedented.
This is another McLuhan quote. I'm curious. I'm going to read it, tell you what I think, and I would love to hear your opinion. Everybody experiences far more than they understand, yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. Now, what I think he's saying, and that doesn't mean I'm right, is that he's kind of trying to distinguish between experience and understanding. So if the kid comes in from the cold and the parent goes, "Don't touch the stove, it'll burn your hand," that's experience. If the kid comes in from the cold and the parent goes, "Let me teach you the dynamics of heat. You can rub your hands close to the stove and get your hands warm," that's understanding. Experience usually shapes our behavior, but understanding should be shaping our behavior.
Yeah.
You want me to read it again, or you got it?
No, I think I've got it. I think this resonates with questions we've had before about emotion and rationality.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense to me, the idea. I don't challenge the idea either of the premises there and that logical syllogism he gave, right? So experience much more than we understand. Yes, that seems unquestionably true. And our behavior is influenced more by experience than understanding. That's also true. I think because, well, the example you gave, uh, I think that we can only ever hope to understand in terms of rationally analyze, bring to light, come to terms with um, a part of our experience. Now, certain parts of our experience, if we don't understand, we will we might suffer more than we need to. Probably we might, because we might have neuroses, or we might be caught in certain things in our past, certain things in our experience. So we need, in a very basic level, I guess this is the idea of psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. We need, perhaps in some cases, to or can help us to be fulfilled and to flourish, to bring understanding to bear on those experiences which catch us and which we're trapped in. I don't think we need, however, to bring the light of understanding and rationality. We don't need to bring, and it's probably impossible to bring, all our experience into that light.
Yeah.
I don't think we should. So, for example, let's say we want to be very good at something. We want to become adept at playing tennis or making chairs or playing a musical instrument. It's the experience and the practice which in fact, it's precisely the not understanding, I would suggest, that makes us proficient. So in that way, behavior, adeptness, benefits from lack of understanding, benefits from an ingraining of experience, but not too much understanding. Whereas the other examples I gave, those bits were, let's say, trauma, things which we might compensate, something we've experienced, which is unbearable to our understanding, and we repress it as a mode of self-protection. That can help us to bring into understanding in some cases. So I think that there's various aspects of that.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
I remember, just to pick a very early memory, I remember my mother was from a very rural part of Ireland called Donegal, which is in the northwest of Ireland, and she was brought up in a very beautiful but very remote place, and we used to go there every year. And during the war, when she was a child, I remember Ireland, the Free State as then was, now the Republic of Ireland, didn't participate in the Second World War. Just Northern Ireland did. So Donegal is near. There was an airplane landed on that beach when my mother was a child, which I always find a kind of a very, I don't know, kind of striking image of a very isolated community. Nothing happens ever during when all this huge war is going on in Europe, and a plane comes down on the beach, crashes. As they did. It was a US plane. And I remember at the age of 5 with my father and my brother and my sister spending 2 days retrieving the airplane tire from that plane.
Wow.
When I was about 4 or 5. So it's not my very first memory, but I was about 4 or 5. So it's an early memory.
Yeah.
Probably when I was 3, 4. But
yeah. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I mean, the obvious answer is both at different times.
Yeah.
I think I mean I like, again, going back to this idea of the continuous self. Without a memory, we have no story. We need a story to function, to live. to have meaning. So, well, whatever benefits there might be, I'm not hugely familiar with Deepak Chopra, who you mentioned, but I imagine he advocates being in the moment and letting memories go and letting anxieties go to come back to other things. I mean, that's what the practice of mindfulness and meditation exhorts. So there's a kind of a sense in which we need to be freed from our memory, we need to be freed from destiny, or from those areas of our memories where we're stuck, from obsessions and regrets. And those are worries, to come back to that. Those are real things about memory. But at the same time, I mean, which of us would voluntarily? I mean, there was a film, wasn't there, a few years ago with this premise about people deleting their memories. But which of us, it happens to people in at the end of their lives sometimes, that memory goes off a short term, or memory goes. But despite the way it can torment us, despite the fact that it can be a curse, our regrets, the moments make us wince, our missed opportunities and so on, our loss, our grief, all those things are part of our memory. They'd be gone. But despite that, I think we need our narrative. We need our story. So more of a blessing, I think, ultimately, if you make a choice.
Let's go to this. Hollis Frampton, experimental filmmaker, said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Could you just, sorry, I was still thinking about memory. Can you, the quote again?
Oh, yeah. No worries. You brought up the word narrative. Yeah. And you really covered memory great, because here's the thing. Of course, 80% of people I ask this question, is memory more a curse or more a blessing? They go, it's a blessing. But then once in a great while go, it's a curse. And, of course it's both. I mean, I don't want to say, of course, it is both. Yeah. And it depends on the memory. But, my dad had Alzheimer's or dementia at the end of his life. And it was like, I spent 8 days with him, and it was like the coolest 8 days of my life. We were just like, hey, you want to go eat now? He goes, yeah. Hey, you want to take a nap? Yeah. I says, you want to go to bed now? He says, yeah. I says, man, we have similar lifestyles, dude. Let's just chill out, But people say they regret it. They go, oh, they have dementia. It's like, that's how humans were made. We kind of return back to our child, and we live in the present. But when you said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. That's a filmmaker saying that. Then I asked the question, can you forget to die?
Can you forget to die? I mean, death is coming. It's inevitable for every living thing. But there's a sense, seen objectively, insofar as we can read the world in those ways. But on the other hand, death isn't something. I mean, if we're going to be logical and we're going to try and have consistency in what we're talking about, we talked earlier, and we raised the idea that the self doesn't exist, is an illusion.
Yeah.
Well, if the self is an illusion, then there's no meaningful dissolution of the self, or rather, there is a continual dissolution of the self every second.
Yeah.
And that only becomes obvious when you think back on the self over periods, in which case you can forget to die. Yeah. Because in which case, yes, then in terms of that subjective way of looking at death, your sense of self, which is coherent because of memory and the story we tell about who we are and our name and our attributes we put on us and all those things which make this illusion, arguably, of the I or the I am. Well, if you forget all those things, then you're not dying. So yes, I can see how you can you can approach, you can understand death with a forgetting to die. It's a very interesting, intriguing, counterintuitive concept.
Well, you covered it well, because most people freak out. What do you mean, can you forget to die? You can forget that you're going to die. And I goes, no, it's up to you to determine whether you want to answer it literally or metaphorically. So you covered all the bases there, and you really brought up Joyce's great line in The Wake: love thy label as thyself. What a great line. Now, Ronan, I asked for 90 minutes and we only got 15 more minutes, but I really want to beg you, we got to do a part 2 and a part 3, because we didn't even get into Joyce yet much. I mean, we dabbled in Joyce, but, I'll send you some dates if you're willing, and we can do it like 3, 4, 5 months down the line, another one.
Sure.
Because I mean, usually
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I usually get through 40 questions and we're on number 7.
Oh, are we?
Yeah. And people are like, oh, I'm too talkative. I said, no, you're like giving me a master class. I'm excited and honored. So tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, just briefly. And what specifically was that impact?
Okay, so someone in my immediate family who was a role model, and then someone outside my immediate family.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm not sure I have in either my family or outside my family a role model. Yeah. I was very lucky in my family. I had very loving parents, and they definitely influenced me. And I guess my father, who died a few years ago, probably had a huge influence on me, but probably also a little about Beckett and Joyce. And I think this is probably true for many of us. The influence our parents have on us is often Oedipal. You go in the other direction. You have to topple. You have to kind of, in mythic terms, the child kills the father in order to find their own identity. And there was a bit of that, probably is in every generation.
Yeah.
So that's why I think, I've got tremendous, love and regard for my late father, who was a great father and was a wonderful person. And I can see him in myself. And even now that I'm a father, I can, rather lamentable thing that when you become a father, and I'm only a father recently, I could hear myself saying things that he used to say. So that's an influence, maybe more than a role model, but certainly he was somebody who had a massive influence on me, as did my mother. And
well, what's one thing you got from your mom? That doesn't have to be role model-ish, but just one kind of trait or impact.
Oh, what did my I think it shouldn't be so difficult to answer this, because my mother is I think was hugely influential and is has so many, but I think it's because it's so deep and there's so many different sides that have influenced me. I think she's and are in me and have a signature. I think that my mother is a very kind person. I would like to think that some of that has rubbed off on me. Very affectionate. Very open. I think I've probably got a bit of that.
Well, just now go into someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you growing up. Like, Ronan, you're a deep thinker and an articulate. Someone that had an impact on you growing up. Like, and what did you get from them? Doesn't have to be considered a role model.
Okay. Somebody growing up, I guess it depends. There were educators, there were teachers, I did. I mean, I'm often very struck by this. I think that somebody should do a book or a collection of memories. We're all talking about, the humanities being under threat and people not wanting to teach literature. But I find that in my experience, just talking to people and also reading widely, a lot of people have an inspirational English teacher.
Yeah.
And I think, we should, it's just something I've noticed in life. I think a lot of people are blessed in having an English teacher who implants a love of literature, a love of ideas, and that is very formative. And I don't think, in my experience, it is the same in other disciplines. I'm sure
Yeah.
people do have inspirational maths teachers and history teachers, but for some reason that discipline that we teach in schools seems to stay with people.
Yeah.
And I did have a couple of um, teachers, both in school and in university, who were who were intellectually exciting.
Yeah.
I would say at different stages, and who opened and helped me to think and helped me to kind of, who I learned from. I
Yeah.
learned from in the way they thought, but also, and I think harder to live up to, is their pedagogical example.
Yeah.
The commitment that certain people, it's a kind of heroism. People, it's
Yeah.
it's a very noble thing to do. I think a very uh, um, honorable way to live is trying to share, is trying to, to light a fire in a young person,
Yeah.
in a door.
The love of books. Everything ends up in a book. Mallarmé. So, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic.
In
I mean, it was a kind of a. It wasn't. I mean, my mother would have been much more observant than my father, which is a common thing, I think.
do you pray?
Yeah, I mean, in my own way. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not a terribly observant Catholic now, really, but I'm not. I'm not a total. I'm not kind of an apostate. I don't apostate in inverted commas. I'm not opposed to it either.
Yeah.
Yes.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Wow.
That's a good word. Wow. First thought, best thought.
um, I guess you'd like welcome,
Yeah.
maybe welcome, and is welcome, well done.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, look, obviously, if there is such a thing as God, it's not going to be somebody kind of opening the pearly gates, letting you in. I don't believe in that sort of a God.
There's a joke, and you can either take it to the devil in hell or
Yeah.
the Saint Pete at the pearly gates. And you get to the pearly gates, and you're on the outside, and you peek in, and you go, "Oh, you've got Zoom and Hive, got internet in heaven." And Saint Pete goes, "That's all we got."
Oh God. I love it.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. And in some way, the hardest question you've asked, to my mind. I think that evil does exist, and it definitely can consume people and make people do very evil things. Are they always that way, or have they been consumed by something called evil? Um, I don't I don't know. I think that's the one I'll have to pass on. But if you
Yeah.
press me, do I think that there's such a thing as an evil baby? It's hard to say yes to that.
Yeah.
So something happens something happens. But I definitely think that evil is a force, and
Yeah.
is something that exists in our world. And wherever you want to, you don't need to necessarily conceive of it in theological terms. But I think, if you've lived and observed and read history and seen some of the things that can happen and have been done, I think one's compelled to acknowledge the existence of evil.
There's a really hidden question here is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the Mob and the Samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Ronan, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think there's something in that. I think that, though I'd want to maybe put a little bit of pressure on the word acknowledge.
Yeah.
If you obsess about your enemy,
Yeah.
if you it's very hard not to, the instinct to identify enemies,
Yeah.
to see people in our enemies, a them and an us impulse. It's very strong, and it's exerting itself hugely now in our culture. I think on things like social media and so on. We talked earlier about violence, and is violence hardwired, and we can see kind of the logic. There's kind of the philosopher Carl Schmitt, who sees these tribal instincts as kind of inevitable in some extent. But certainly, if we look at the way technology is shaping itself and the way the culture wars shape themselves, we can it's rather dismaying. But I think that so to come back to your question, acknowledge. I don't think that one. I mean, I think he's putting a lot of weight on that word acknowledge. I think it's hard not to acknowledge your enemy. If you want to deny your enemy, is that the alternative? I think we have to acknowledge our enemies the same way we have to acknowledge our feelings. But acknowledging our feelings isn't giving them permission to overtake us and to obsess us and control us. And if we do that, we're certainly giving our enemy power over us. The other quotes you gave, I think, just reveal how multifaceted the question is. A lot of people are. I mean, my prefatory remarks there about the internet and so on, and tribalism and the them and us logic that seems to pervade so much and seems to be becoming dominant and facilitated by social media and modern technologies. That can certainly be enabling for some people. I think that to write against. I remember Christopher Hitchens, before he died, said something like, what's your motivation? To be vindicated and to make my enemies see that they were wrong.
Yeah.
And that is a motive. And one or two of the quotes, I think, provided that for you, but indicated that. But look, I think that Swift talked about the savage indignation.
Yeah.
Salvo indignatio, and there's no doubt that faced with injustice and deplorable behavior, there's a role for indignation. There's a role to be impelled through outrage and through to be spurred on by a certain sort of antipathy or antagonism. But I think enemies and hatred and is a very can be also a very corrosive thing.
Yeah, look at you nailed this. A skateboard philosopher in Venice Beach told me, when I asked him that, he says, well, the word enemy
Ah,
Words evoke more than their meaning. Enemy, when
love it.
it's like, so here's the follow-up. By the way, that was really good because again, you're a comprehensivist. This is Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson said, oh, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's, again, a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
It can do, I think, actually. I mean, sometimes exposure for somebody doing something they know is wrong, whether it's a child or an adult, and the recognition that that brings, or the kind of the glare, you know, what Sartre calls regard l'autre. I think Sartre has a story somewhere. Jean-Paul Sartre, there's a story somewhere about the peeping Tom, who's looking and he's a voyeur, and he gets caught, and then he becomes the object of the gaze, and all of a sudden he's kind of abject and caught in the glare. But I think if we can see that phenomenon of a peeping Tom being caught out, I think that can lead to a certain recognition of wrongdoing sometimes.
Yeah.
Would be my initial thing, which isn't to license, you know, the scarlet letter type culture of pulling people, you know, exposing wrongdoing. But I think in some degree, punishment is a gift to the wrongdoer. You know, I think that that I like the idea of paying one's debt to society. It's a cliche, but I think that if you've committed a crime and you pay your debt to society, then it's discharged. Maybe it's the Catholic in me that I kind of like the idea of a kind of absolution. But I think there's something, isn't it a wonderful thing to be able to absolve oneself, or to be absolved socially of wrongdoing? And part of that is recognition, I think.
Amazing. Frank Zappa says, I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure.
Who says that?
Frank Zappa.
Oh, does he? Okay.
But I'm not, I mean, I'm not quite equating it, but it's similar how, you know, you surrender, you get caught. I mean, the big question I've asked people for a couple of years now is ridiculous. But if Trump doesn't run for president, gets thrown in jail, writes a book, I'm sorry, I did wrong, would you forgive him? I'm glad you're laughing.
And how have people answered that?
Well, you guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's. I'm not a betting man, but I think I would be safe enough to say that Trump is never going to write a book called I Did Wrong. I would take.
Well, the question is, would you forgive him? 99.9% of people go no, because he would be lying. But again, it's.
Well, I mean, I would take I would have interpreted the hypothetical question as being that he was actually contrite and actually was recognizing his wrongdoing.
He was being truthful.
Yeah.
Well, can you go a little longer?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, let's do a couple more, and then we'll try to do part two, because these are two questions that I really wanted to get into. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago, Vault at the cinema.
Yeah.
He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner says, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because I think that art does more. There are two visions of art, very, simply put. There's many, but let's just divide them into the idea of an old distinction: the mirror and the lamp.
Yeah.
If you see art as a mirror, which just reproduces things, represents life, you're tapping into the idea, Plato's idea of art, namely it's a copy.
Yeah.
And we know what Plato would have done to the poets in his Republic. He would have thrown them out of his Republic because they're liars, because the copy is less authentic than the original. So that is a persistent idea, theme all the way through, I think, Western art history, a distrust of the representation as fraudulent or as a copy. And certainly that gets picked up by Puritans and, those who wanted to, distrustful of the graven image. But another idea of art is not the mirror, but the lamp. It's something which tells a truth in some ways beyond verisimilitude, beyond the depiction of appearances in order for you to understand appearances. There's a role for art which, let me put it this way, where it tells the truth, not just the facts.
Yeah.
So the objection that a novel is just made up, why not go into real history? Well, there's a sense in which a novel, though made up, can tell, even a realist novel, can give insights into truth, whether that's psychological truth, a Tolstoy novel, or political truths or historical truths, albeit at one remove. So art, at its best, it seems to me, there's a mirroring aspect of it. I mean, this is all in Ulysses. It's all in the opening episode of Ulysses. And I talk about the mirror and the lamp, but there's also the mirror and the lance in the opening episode of Ulysses.
LANCE, LANCE.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
The shaving bowl and the razor on top of the mirror that Stephen is holding. And they define Stephen Dedalus is holding in the cracked looking glass of the artist, the image of Irish art. And then they go into Picture Dorian Gray, which I spoke about earlier, and the purpose of art. But I see representation and art and as a mode. I mean, we're speaking very abstractly here, but as a depends on the art. But its ambition is to tell the truth, not just the facts. Now, there's a great role for realist and art, and one which, I think in some ways Ulysses, for all its vaunting as a experimental novel, is also a very, very realist one. It's also one which depicts with fastidiousness and exactitude particular moments in a particular day. But there's also, I think, this is true for Ulysses or all other art, a way in which it illuminates as well as represents.
It's really beautiful what you said, Ronan, because McLuhan broke it down to matching and making.
Yeah.
Matching is the mirror making. And you've stressed this word a lot, truth. And I wanted to just go into truth for a few minutes, if you don't mind.
Yep.
And I'll read you a quote about truth, and then you react to it. Shelby Foote, a fact is not a truth until you love it.
Oh, I like that.
I liked your reaction on that one. Go ahead. What's your take on that one?
I think it's really I think it's a very resonant and suggestive quote, which I would like to write down and will and look it up. Why do I love it so much? I think it's a little bit like the difference between knowledge and wisdom. scientia and sapientia.
Yeah.
Knowledge is, you can have lots and lots of knowledge, but you can have no wisdom unless you integrate into your knowledge judgment. And
Yeah.
judgment involves values and the proper application of values and selections and so on.
Yeah.
And that's in some way our challenge. And this goes back to your earlier questions about information. It also, I think, ties up a lot of things we've been talking about emotion and so on. Because we have in our, and indeed the comments you've been making about McLuhan, we have in our age huge access to scientia, but less because it's all on our phones, it's all at our fingertip, knowledge. But sapientia, wisdom, is in much shorter supply and harder to find. And I think that the gap between knowledge and wisdom is also that between fact and truth. And a fact becomes a truth when we add value, when we acknowledge or bring out value, quality, some sense of the numinous. It doesn't need to be a religious sense at all, but in which we see not just things, but or not just facts, but some sort of resonance, consciousness, if you like.
Beautiful. T.S. Eliot said, "Had the experience, but missed the meaning."
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Very good. Very good.
So here's Louis Buñuel. "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it."
Yeah. Very, very, very wise. I like that.
Well, 90% of people say, "Oh, I love that." One guy finally says, "That's bullshit, because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it." So I morphed it into this question. If the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to seek or name a destination?
Because even though we may not get to the destination, even though we may not get to truth, it doesn't mean we don't approach it. Okay, so to say that, like, the reason why I like the Buñuel quote is because I think I think certainty leads to totalitarianism.
Yeah.
Anyone who feels that they have the truth, it can lead to fanaticism, and fanaticism can lead to totalitarianism, and there's a politics behind that certainty of any sort. So I've kind of emphasized the value of a certain epistemological humility in the face of our complex world and our complex reality. That doesn't mean that I think there's no such thing as truth, that I think every interpretation there's a free market of them. I don't think that. So that's what I would say to your, the contrarian interviewee who said, well, no, if I'm going to see something, I have to find it. It's not that there is that to say that you don't arrive at fixity and certainty and total knowledge in this life is not to say that there is no light, there is no lighthouse that you can approach. You just won't get to the lighthouse, but you'll get some of its illumination, would be my answer to that.
This is, you brought up Mallarmé. Yeah, I was really impressed. You talked about the symbolist in your Yeats lecture.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Beautiful. Mallarmé said, "To define is to kill, to suggest is to create." I mean, that is brilliant. But the one thing is about the Buñuel quote is some people say, well, you don't have to name a destination, because that's what the flaneurs did in the 20s. Joyce and Hemingway and all these guys in Paris, or people in Paris, they just sat around and drank coffee. And like Joyce says, I didn't write Finnegan's Wake. Those people at the coffee house did. And they did psychogeography. They just wandered aimlessly. And then, as Joyce said, you find an epiphany in everydayness.
Yeah. And I think that everydayness, becoming, transience, the now, the fleeting now, are are central. You know, the coming together, the continual process of coming together and dissolution. Maybe this is why Finnegan's Wake is so important.
Yeah.
Maybe this is you know, we're still striving to be Joyce's contemporary, as Ellman famously put it. But maybe that kind of sense in which there is no you know, culminating certainty about things, no culminating truth. There is a continual process of coming together and dissolution.
Yeah. Are you burnout, or can you do a few more minutes?
No, it's fine. I've been on for a while.
Yeah. There's two things we can go to, because I wanted to do this one. Let's finish on the truth one, and then we'll do the archive thing. Okay, so here's one more truth quote. Eartha Kitt: truth is a theory that is constantly being disproved. Only lies, it seems, go on forever. Now there's a lot in there, because, you know, truth is being disproved, but only lies, it seems, go on forever.
Do you think she means? I wonder. Does she mean the phenomenon of lying, or particular lies?
Yeah. Well, she puts it as a noun. Only lies. She says only lies, it seems, go on forever. I wish we could talk to her about it, because someone brought up Karl Popper, and I have my note there. But really, the question is, in this regard, this is Proust. On what occasion do you lie?
I mean, the Popper thing probably is falsifiability. So
Yeah.
one account of knowledge, particularly scientific knowledge, preparing an account, means that, well, I'm sure you know this, Jerry, but you know the idea that the only admissible claims in science, or a certain mode of science, certainly if you're Popperian, are ones which are falsifiable.
Yeah.
So it has to be able to be falsified in order to be admissible. So a claim which isn't falsifiable, like W.B. Yeats writes beautiful poetry, it's not falsifiable or verifiable.
Yeah.
Is so maybe that kind of paradigm, that the only things we stand on certainty are the things which crumble, or are liable to crumble. There's a kind of inbuilt, you know, if you're a Popperian, then maybe there's an inbuilt obsolescence in your truth claims, if they're falsifiable, because who knows which of our self-evident truths will be discredited by the Galileo of tomorrow, or 500,000 years. You know, we just do not know. So there is a sense in which those truth claims we make about the world, you know, if you have a sense of history and you see how beliefs of the world are unearthed and completely destabilized, just like the sense of ourself as the center of the universe has been destabilized, and torn apart. It is the case that we need to. I mean, I think this is a sense in which our certainties are contingent, and we don't know which ones are going to dissolve.
Yeah. There's another atomic age philosopher who said something like, behind a truth is a falsity, but behind every falsity could be another truth, or something like that. It's like, you know, that's not logical. It's what I think what you described as the Popper thing, you know.
Yeah.
And then Schopenhauer, back to him, what you said, all truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed, then it's violently opposed, and then accepted. I knew that all along. That was self-evident.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the last topic, if it could ever end. This is too much for me. I'm just Milking the source. Thank you so much. This is archive. The word archive.
Yeah.
1400. Keep safe, free from harm. 200 years later, this is etymological breakdown. Record preserved as evidence. That's archive. That's what we sort of know. It's record preserved. Okay, so then we have, it even means the Greek town hall, public meeting, to be the first. We know what saving stuff is. You have books, I have books, libraries. I go to a library every day. I love libraries, but I love the futurists saying destroy all libraries and burn all museums. But I don't want to do that, but I love that they thought it up. Then there's the Zen, be here now, Ram Dass, live in the present. In fact, Joyce's guy he'd like to talk about in the wake, Wyndham Lewis, said, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. So live in the moment. So why do we have to save stuff if we're supposed to be living in the moment? What's this all about? Because I know, is it the basic two questions are, is archiving more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archives? But the last thing is, the Egyptians put stuff in their coffin with them. And so they died with their stuff. And then someone just told me last week, there's something in the Bible where you bury your dead underneath your house so that their spirit, like they're part of your archive.
Yeah.
How important it's been that you could study, being a professor of Irish studies, that you could study archives. But isn't the point of life to live in the moment? So is archiving more innate or more invented? Or anything you want to go on this idea of archiving?
Well, I mean, as you're asking the question, I was thinking about the question you asked earlier about memory, and is memory a good or bad thing? And I think archives are to a culture what memory is to an individual.
Yeah.
And when I think about what I think about archives, it makes me less ambivalent about memory. I think a culture is profoundly denuded without its memory, without its archives, without its books. I think the loss of archives, the loss of documentary evidence of the past is a cataclysm for a culture.
Yeah.
Not least because, as I said to one other question about ideas, are there? I was being slightly facetious, but I answered, well, are there any new ideas? But I think that we are profoundly enriched, immeasurably enriched by the writings and efforts and lives and experiences of those who have gone before us, and profoundly precedented. And I can't imagine living in a world without archives, without libraries, without books, without the not just for the great art, the great literature, the great poetry, the great philosophy that has been written in the past. I mean, it's probably the question that I'm least ambivalent about that you've asked about, and maybe it's the way I'm interpreting the question. And maybe ultimately everything will end up, going into the sun when the sun expands. So it's only a matter of time. But I think that it makes me much less ambivalent about the memory question, the archive question. I think that I didn't know that root of the word archive, keep free from harm, because that is such a kind of, I really like that, and I like the idea. I like the idea of the academic, or the like that of the librarian or the museum curator, as being the custodian, the custodian of a heritage and an inheritance that we are passing on. So I've said a few bad things about inheritance during this talk, about how restrictive it can be and how it's kind of a destiny. But I think there's a sense in which cultural inheritance is priceless. and absolutely central to um, my sense of what's valuable in the world.
But is this need or want to archive more innate or more invented by humans?
I think it has. Well, I think that you, in your comments about ancestors being buried beneath grounds, I mean, it does seem, from my knowledge, I'm not an anthropologist, but here I live in Australia, where there's uh, um, recognition and increasing recognition of indigenous knowledges. And I know in Australian indigenous cultures, Australian Aboriginal culture, uh, ancestry is extremely important. I think that's true for a lot of indigenous cultures. The connection, the living connection to ancestry, the living connection to a lineage, to a past, is central, or is very, very animating. And that would suggest that idea of reaching back beyond our own lives or the lives of our immediate family, is something that a lot of cultures want to do. Western culture is a culture of the word. It's a culture of the written word, and this is how we have done it through libraries and archives. I think that accumulation um, isn't acultural. I would say it's innate, but not ahistorical, which is my
Yeah.
answer to a lot of your innate questions.
Yeah. It's
They are innate, but not ahistorical.
yeah. And it's fun because you don't have a bunch of hard drives on your shelf in back of you. You got a bunch of books because you're like Mallarmé. Everything ends up in a book. But you know, do you have plans for your own archive? Because you've written books, you've written essays. I imagine
Yeah.
a large percentage of them are online. And if you read this recent article, it tells how the cloud is killing the world.
Yeah.
Talking about climate change and the waters to cool all the stuff. And then talking with all these archivists, the highbrow archivists, they go, if you got a hard drive, you've got to check it every year and replace it every 10 years. And people, they don't. I mean, do you do that? Do you replace your hard drives every 10 years and check them every year?
I don't, and I'm
Right.
bad
But
at.
if you die, Ronan, does your wife or kids going to take care of your archives? And you just say do it, or they go, we don't care. I mean, do you care? Like, do you have a university that's going to hold your archives, or do you have a plan for your archive? Is the question.
Do I have a plan for my archive? No, I don't. Is the honest answer. Should I have a plan for my archive? I think probably we should. I
Yeah,
should. I think that I think a little bit like we should have a will, and it's easier for those we leave behind if we do. And I think that I mean, what of my archive? I mean, I talk about the need to preserve, and the need to kind of keep books. Our challenge, and this goes back to a question I made just our discussion we had just a couple of questions ago about about which grew out of the quote you gave between facts and truth.
yeah,
And I said that we have a huge amount of information, but not enough selection.
yeah,
And I think that is really the challenge of the age at the moment: the selection, and wise selection and sapientia. So the problem is, um, you mentioned the cloud and the bird, the cloud, these clouds and the energy these are a hell of a lot of energy, those cloud centers. The problem is that we may end up losing our archive, not through the burning of Library of Alexandria, but the way, you remember that film, The Raiders of the Lost Ark?
yeah,
Remember the end of that movie, the way they hide the ark at the end? They put it the box in the middle in a warehouse with loads and loads of new boxes over the boxes. I think that could be our challenge for how we lose our memory, how we lose items. We are so our technology allows us to save so much, to forget nothing, to accumulate so much, and there is there is an onus and a drive within university syllabi to include, for political reasons, and that's a good thing in many ways. But at the moment, it's kind of expansion, 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 and ultimately, I think we need. I use the words custodianship and curatorship. A curatorship means that we have to preserve what to select. So I don't think I'd be doing anyone any favors if I didn't, or any of us would be doing any favors. I mean, if you're James Joyce or Samuel Beckett, Beckett has. I used to work in a Beckett archive in the UK, and he has little scraps written on cigarette papers called the Millinards, and these are. I mean, thank God we have them. Thank God we have them when we didn't throw them away. They're beautiful. They're amazing. I mean, Coleridge wrote some scraps on skin, on his own skin in the back.
Are you kidding? And the skin exists?
On his own skin, yeah. He wrote little things which we have. So detritus is and rubbish is some things which might have been regarded as rubbish. I'm glad they haven't been discarded.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't see how the answer to preserving our cultural memory is keeping everything and teaching everything. We have to use our sapientia and our selection and our curation in a digital age to keep what is worth keeping. And we may even make mistakes, but otherwise we're going to lose everything. Everything I've written, is not. There's no point in me. I don't. I'm. We're not talking. I mean, major writers should keep everything, and we'll keep a lot. But people like me, we should keep a perhaps select more rigorously than people like Joyce or Beckett.
Let me ask you, spell that word you've been saying, asempia. How do you spell that word?
What did I say?
It sounds like you're saying asempia or sempia. You're saying a word.
Sapientia. Sorry, it's wisdom. Sapientia. So it gives us the word sapiens, the French word sapiens, which has come into English. Sapiens. Okay. So the Latin word sapientia.
Yeah. Good. I just want to be sure of that.
Yeah. And then I opposed it to scientia, which gives us the word science. So Scientia. I think there's some university, it may even be one that I taught in, and the motto is Scientia et Sapientia, knowledge and wisdom.
Knowledge and wisdom, yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the last thing. We have Joyce reading the Wake for 5 minutes, a tape of it.
Yeah, I've heard it, yeah.
Yeah. Now we can take that tape, feed it into AI, and have Joyce read the entire Wake.
Oh, God. Can we do that? Are you serious?
Yeah. I mean, anything.
It makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, what an amazing thing. So, I always think the Wake is a satire on information overload.
Yeah.
And that is, that's this thing is like, who becomes the curator, the selector when you're reading the Wake, because every, it's like one word in the Wake, laugh tears, is the entire Wake. So it's like one of our readers says every page on the Wake has everything that's on all the other pages. It's like, so it is this amazing living organism when you read it out loud with a group of people.
I completely agree. And that's why, that Elman quote, we're still striving to be Joyce's contemporary. I mean, the Wake has got hyperlinks. Every page indicating every other page. I mean, it's like something. This is why we'll see what digital technology does for the cultural penetration and survival of the Wake. I can see a lot of ways of it opening up that text.
Yeah.
But I mean, I love that idea of it a bit about information overdrive, but you just have all these seeds all over those words.
Yeah.
You have seeds, and we started off talking about flourishing. I think that in reading the Wake, and often, as you well know, it's best read in a group. you kind of germinate those seeds
Oh yeah.
in the words, these kind of, many of which, but you don't germinate all of them. You germinate
Yep.
because there's so much you don't hear, and that's why you can reread it.
Yes. It's endless.
Yeah.
Yeah. In closing, did you see Shane MacGowan's funeral service when the Pogues lead singer died, and they're in the church and the priest holds up the wake like it's the host.
There's a report of his funeral. I didn't see that bit. I missed that.
There's a still of the priest holding it up like it's the host.
Oh, wonderful.
And the woman at you should at least try it at Sweeney's pub. I mean, not Sweeney's pub, Sweeney's pharmacy.
Yeah.
We read the wake every Tuesday with these people all over the world on a Zoom. And Pistachio helps run it, says, yeah, my nephew was serving Shane in a hotel once as the busboy, and he brought him like 10 stout beers, stout Guinness, and it was only Shane. He goes, oh, you having a party? And he goes, no, I'm working. Ronan, it's been such a pleasure and honor. I so appreciated your time and energy, and you indeed enlightened me completely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your work, Jerry. And it was great fun. So, and thanks for all you do, and best of luck with all your endeavors. And sure, I'm very happy to help again if ever I can. Yeah,
we'll plan a part 2 somewhere down the line. I'll send you some dates.
Sure thing. Keep the faith.
Thank you, Ronan. Thank you.